Okay, welcome back to Boundaries and Banter. We're your hosts, Taryn and Michaela. And in the last few episodes, we kind of talked about in-law dynamics a little bit more specifically with, certain people in your family dynamic, in-law dynamic, but we really want to go back to basics and kind of establish what a boundary is. We talk about how important boundaries are, but what are they really?
Today we have our expert, Berni Freed. She is a family therapist, licensed LMFT. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you.
So we could tell you what we think a boundary is, but we would love to hear from you. What is a boundary? How do you navigate them? And how do you go about implementing them?
And what are the purpose of them?
Oh, yeah. Why do we have a boundary? What is the need?
Okay, well, why don't we just start with what a boundary is?
Okay.
A boundary is like where I start and you begin. It's that ability to really hold on to your own values, your sense of integrity, and where your needs actually are. So having boundaries are fundamental in establishing or even reestablishing relationships with others.
Okay. And are there kinds of different types of boundaries?
There's physical boundaries, which has everything to do with the sense of safety and like the actual, people that are violating in proximity, whether they're coming too close, even a close talker, that could be like a boundary for people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like that's the physical people that are yelling, just the typical thing you would think about in terms of the physicality part. Then there's what's called emotional boundaries or emotional transgressions, which is where people are crossing over and you're ending up feeling either violated or trounced on or a need to push back. So that's the emotional. And then relational boundaries, which I have a feeling is a lot of what you guys deal with, which is in terms of blended families and starting to deal with in-laws and others in family relationships, and also just overall the relational boundaries that often get crossed in very subtle, nuanced ways sometimes.
It kind of sounds like they all intertwine though, right?
They can at points, sure. I think the physical boundary one is probably the easiest one to identify.
Right.
It's when you're dealing with somebody who has no boundaries emotionally that it can be a little trickier. And before you know it, you can feel really resentful and overwhelmed.
So what does that look like?
Well, what that looks like is when you're interacting with somebody that you actually might want their respect or you're trying to establish a relationship with them. For example, like an in-law, you really want to be in your best self. And ultimately you may overdo that to the point that you end up abandoning yourself and ending up feeling resentful or stressed out or overwhelmed, because at the core of it is you're abandoning self and what is ultimately most important is you.
But how does that differ from a relational boundary? Because if my understanding of relational boundary, based on what you've said, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, and I think that, you had spoken about this with me and Michaela before, is that it's kind of like where your role ends and where mine starts. For example, like if my mother-in-law came into my home and I was cooking in the kitchen, if she kind of pushed me out to finish the job, that would kind of be
crossing a boundary.
Crossing our relational boundary, right? Like
Yes.
That's my role in my home. But I guess, how does it differ from an emotional boundary?
Well, it's actually all of the above. It's physical because A, it's in your home.
Right.
And B, it's actually in your kitchen. And she's wanting to take over.
Okay.
So that you've got the physical. And so that then is already putting you feeling either stressed out or uncomfortable. And then the emotional is her imposing the way she wants to do things, which in her mind might override what you may need or not need. So that's where the emotional transgression occurs. And then the overall relational one is you're trying to protect a relationship with somebody that your family values.
Right. So the emotional component is quite nuanced.
It is. It's very nuanced. And it really requires a deep need to know who you are and what you actually really need. Taking that initiative to check in with yourself and really understand what it is you're needing and wanting so that you can establish.
The fact that you say it really takes, knowing what you want and how you want to establish things, it makes me think about a few years ago when I was heavily into real estate. I got a call at about, I think it was like midnight, from my boss and a colleague telling me to write an offer. And I was in bed, I was sleeping. The call woke me up, but I answered it.
Sure.
And I actually got out of bed and wrote the offer. Okay. So I feel like maybe I didn't know what my boundaries were maybe at the point, but I guess no one had enough respect for me, including myself in the situation, to actually put a boundary on it and say, it's midnight. I'm either not answering the call or I'll do this in the morning during work hours. So I guess that leads into my question of how do you implement a boundary?
Well, number one is it always starts with self, like anything in therapy or understanding, like how do we hold on to ourselves so that we don't abandon what we actually feel and need and want. So that would be the first thing. So if you're in the difficult situation, you get to pause and ask yourself the deeper question. Am I willing to die on this hill? Like, how important is this to me?
Right.
And when I say that, what I mean is like your sense of integrity, your sense of what is actually very important to you as a parent, as a wife, as a, daughter-in-law, these types of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But then when it comes to in-laws, who is it my job or my husband's job to establish the boundary?
Oh, that's such a good question. That's so tricky. First, it's you, because it always is, because we always have to honor ourselves.
Because that's your sense of self.
Exactly.
It's like, this is my boundary because this is my sense of self.
Exactly.
Right.
The where it gets tricky, where the relational boundary piece comes into play, kind of coming back to what you were saying, Taryn, is this idea of asking yourself that deeper question, which is, what do I really need and want? And also, in your partnership with your husband, that is also part of it. Is he willing to support you in it? Because it's really threefold. It's him, but it's also the family and his role with them.
Okay, well, my question to you then is, what does implementing that boundary sound like? Quick phrases, because I know it's obviously, you don't want to get into a whole lengthy conversation with this kind of thing, right? You kind of want to just establish a boundary and move forward and not kind of
visit it
get
again.
into the weeds of it, right? Because you're not
Totally.
trying to change that person's perception. You're just trying to communicate what you want.
Right. Well, let's be clear. When you're setting a boundary after having not set one for a period of time, right? It's very important, as we kind of touched in a little bit, is to like be very clear on what it is you're needing and wanting. For example, like, I'm not okay with my kids eating in front of the television set.
Okay.
Like, that's a hard no for me.
Right.
So you could establish that boundary in a really kind way. Just FYI, when we're here, I'm going to ask that the kids don't eat in front of the television set. And oftentimes, if there's really hard-rooted boundaries that, where they want to do it their way, they may just blow past you and ignore you. In which case, you'd have to reestablish, did you hear what I said? And then sometimes you have to repeat it. And that can be really rough if you're not used to doing that.
Well, I have no problem doing that, but what if it happens multiple times? Then what?
Well, you need, again, you don't do this alone. Number one, you do not set boundaries alone.
So, right. So my question for you is, how does the person you've set the boundary, now the kid of the person, so let's say in this scenario, in this fake scenario, what does he say?
I mean, so you start with your husband. Let's be clear. I'm not okay with our kids eating in front of the television set, to use our example here. And he would say, well, my parents like them to eat, whatever it is. Once you have the established agreement with your husband, then at a certain point, you may have to pull him in, reestablishing us as a family, this is how we're going to be doing this and going forward.
You need to put your foot down.
You really have to just keep reestablishing it to the point that you then set something more concrete, which is, it's 3:00. By 5:00, we need to put the kids to bed.
And so what I'm asking you is, how does somebody find the words? How does someone communicate it without it becoming a need to still try to please the parents or the person you're trying to set the boundary with, right? So instead of it being like, no, I just want this because of this. I don't mean anything.
Like, don't
by
over-explain.
No.
Versus this is our boundary.
Well, can I say something before you even get into the answer? Because I think it goes into this. If I'm setting a boundary, the other party might take it as a personal attack. Like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you trying to set this? Why are you doing this to me? Instead of just understanding this is actually going to strengthen our relationship.
Right, but I think that the main thing is to not get sucked into the reactivity, that you hold on to the message. The problem is that in any family, there's always the conditioning of the particular family that you come from, right? That's why family relationships can be so hard. Is because
trauma.
you really get sucked into the people pleasing or the I didn't really mean that, like getting really apologetic because you want to be the favorite one or the liked one, or you don't want to hurt their feelings. And I think like it's an opportunity to learn to be able to just speak and oftentimes restate what the boundary is and be really clear about it.
Is there ever a time that you don't need to explicitly state, this is my boundary? Like it just kind of is?
There's many like implicit boundaries, right? Like if you've ever been to someone's house who has like the basket, like you have to take your shoes off before you go in. Like you already know.
Right.
Oh, we don't wear shoes in this person's house. Or, there's even the way people are wired, implicitly you're kind of cued to what you may or may not need. Some people don't put the hand out to shake their hand, or they're not a hugger.
Oh, right. Like they put their hands behind their back and you kind of just know. I'm not gonna shake his hand. Right.
Yeah. Or, they eyes cast downward. They're not really wanting to stay in contact. So they're more closed off. They're more needing the implicit sense of moving away from you. So those are all boundary cues.
Okay, but when it's something like, I really want to give the listeners, like people who struggle kind of finding the words, maybe they're not.
I do. I struggle. You could say me.
Even you. Maybe you can't find the words. Maybe you get stumbled. Maybe you're tripping up on your own need for self-validation. Maybe you're just linguistically.
You explain too much. I find myself explaining too much.
Or maybe you're linguistically just not inclined. Like whatever it is.
Right.
You don't know how to find the words, or you do, but you get sucked in with wanting to people please, whatever. What are the words?
The words. The words are, this is what I'm needing right now. I need these hours. It's putting self first. Part of what we were talking about earlier is once I've identified, like, I'm not okay with my kids eating dinner, I'm watching television, I need to feel it in my body and then just tell the person that. Because number one, with a boundary, you need clarity so that when I'm clear with you, it's not something to be argued with. It's just a fact that I'm needing X. So I think for people that are listening, it's really important to understand how to not abandon self. No, oh, I'm sorry, or oh, I know this may hurt your feelings, but I'm going to ask you to take your shoes off, or, I know this is uncomfortable, but can we please not bring that up in front of my kids right now? The apologetic, passive elements are not part of what goes with boundary setting.
It's just a social norm that people do to try and soften a blow that doesn't need to be softened because it's just a fact.
It's a fact. Right. And it's, I mean, it's such a cliche and it's so often overused, but I'll use it anyway. Like, you know, they talk about like when you're on an airplane and the oxygen masks come down and you have a kid next to you, who do you put the oxygen mask on first? You put it on yourself, you take a breath, and then the kid, right? So it's really important that we learn to put our own needs and our self-values first.
So if somebody keeps kind of, let's stick with this example because I like it. Like if somebody keeps breaking this boundary or overstepping the boundary, right? Like every time you come over with your kids, they're putting the TV on during dinner and they just kind of don't give a damn. Is there a point where the consequence is I'm no longer bringing my kids over for dinner?
100%.
At what point?
I mean, pretty quickly.
Pretty quickly, right?
You have to stick to it, right?
Well, once you've been clear, you've established the boundary, you've said, I'm not okay with the TV on while the kids are here, and they went ahead and put the TV on, I would say, did you hear what I said? And have them even repeat it back to you.
Right.
I have never had that specific thing happen to me with the
Right, I only
TV or
use
whatever.
that
I mean,
as an
I'm sure it
example.
happens a lot.
Sure.
But there have been situations where I've stated my boundary, and then even in this TV situation, I would likely get a response like, just go with the flow. Why are you so strict? Just let her watch TV, So what do you do in that situation?
You're being bullied.
Okay.
Yes,
Fair.
you're being bullied. And think about, as a parent, what are you modeling for your kids?
Right.
You know, that's a bullying behavior. It's kind of passive aggressive and bullying.
And also, I mean, if you're implementing a boundary and then there are consequences to that boundary, like I don't bring my kids over during dinner anymore or whatever it is, and it's not because I'm punishing, it's not to punish, it's just this is going to be detrimental to my kids or the way I want to raise my kids and it crosses the boundary, so I'm just not going to do it anymore. It's not because I'm trying to punish, but the receiver of that almost always without fail thinks, oh, I'm just being punished. I'm the victim in this.
Right, but then that begs the question for you, which is, are you going to fall into that role with them?
Right, or just take the high road and be like, the reaction is irrelevant to me because the only thing that's relevant to me is implementing the thing I think is important for my child.
It's hard to get to that point where the reaction is irrelevant for you.
That's true, but that's something you get to grapple with independently. But I think at the end of the day, once you start establishing boundaries and having more and more of a voice and speaking your truth and being in self, that at the end of the day, no one can take that from you.
My 7-month-old, he's not really trying to cross it. My 2.5-year-old, she is, for example, she'll tell us in the morning, I want to eat chips right now. And I don't like the crying. I don't like to see her cry, but I sometimes will just say, you're not getting chips. And if you want to cry, you can cry. Like that's the beginning and the end of it. So I guess I'm also learning how to set boundaries with my own child, which is not easy.
No.
You want to see them happy.
Right.
And even, I think this was like 2 days ago, she did something that I didn't like. And I said, you know what? Until you can learn to not do that specific behavior or whatever it is, like we're not going to watch TV. And every day it's like, I want TV, I want TV, I want TV. And I heard this from another friend. If you say no TV, you need to stick with it. Like you can't say, oh, okay, you're crying, like fine, 5 minutes of TV. You need to stick with that boundary that you created. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, no one's going to take you seriously.
And the other thing, back to the idea of how detrimental it is when you just like succumb to something that feels uncomfortable in your system and you're just going, quote, with the flow, which you're actually not. You're actually abandoning self. You're setting yourself up not only for resentment, but anxiety, being like panic attacks, like stressing out, and deep, deep resentment.
Right.
Because as long as you're using your gut as the guide, ultimately you can keep the boundary pretty healthy. It's when you ignore your gut feelings, You go against them. You just are abandoning self, accommodating somebody else's agenda for you that actually doesn't serve you or what is your ultimate good. That will end up making you feel bad about yourself.
There are certain values that come with certain cultures, like having a big family or doing certain things or sacrificing certain things for the sake of family. And how do you implement your boundaries when that boundary feels like an attack on somebody's culture?
So are you saying then that the person you're trying to set the boundary with feels like their culture is being attacked?
How do you do that without it can be, you can offend somebody and you don't mean to, and you're not wrong to say how you feel, but like you can understand why somebody would feel offended based on their cultural understanding.
But that's also like such a cultural ancestral norm that you respect your elders, kind of on the whole. The idea that this person is older and they then are entitled to XYZ or all of that, aside from whatever cultural different rituals or things that they may feel is important, and so I think at the end of the day, part of making room, not just for yourself, but for them as well, is finding that middle ground, right? Like, I'm okay with this much of that. You have to find, but you can use your gut in figuring that out.
Right. Like you have to bend a little bit because you have to have certain sensitivities. And yeah, I think it can be really difficult when you enter a marriage with somebody that had never had to implement boundaries in their family, and now they're starting to have to.
Well, it's absolutely devastating for people because they lose their sense of self. And particularly in certain families where when they're perceived as the special one or the kid that, can do no wrong. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, mom or dad, that can be really scary for them. Even as a 30-something-year-old adult, it doesn't matter. It can still feel like they're going to lose their connection.
Right. Well, I think this is probably a good time to get into our story. Do you want to read it today? So, Berni, just so you know, we have viewers send in their stories.
Oh, I love that.
Things that they need advice on. So the email is boundariesandbanter@gmail.com. We've received a few stories and we've chosen one relevant to today's episode.
Okay. So here's what happened at Shabbat dinner. I got up from the table for a minute and left my phone on the sideboard. When I came back, my sister-in-law was holding it and clearly scrolling through my messages. I asked, "Why are you holding my phone?" And she said, "I thought it was mine." But the screen was open to my group chat. So in front of everyone, she added, "So this is what you say about me?" She had gone through the chat where I vent about her sometimes. The whole table went silent. I had no idea how much she read. Now it's awkward, and she's acting like she's the one who was hurt, even though she snooped through my phone. How do I handle this? Do I confront her? Do I ignore her? Do I apologize even though she crossed the boundary? What would you do?
First and foremost, I would say it is not okay to go through my phone, period.
Violation.
It's a complete boundary violation.
Yeah.
That is my private, separate, information that has absolutely, it's none of your business. So whatever she read in there, actually, it's kind of on her. Like if whoever this person is was talking poorly about her, I mean, I hate to say it, but she kind of like deserved that in a sense because she picked up,
she brought it upon herself.
Phone.
Do you think that she should say sorry?
I mean, it would be nice, but somebody that would, I'm not convinced that she may say sorry. Right. Sounds like she sort of grandstanded a bit around it.
I think if I were in the situation, I'd probably say like, "I'm sorry you read those things and I'm sorry that those things hurt you, but you should never have gone through my phone.
Yeah,
and I'm entitled to what I say."
Right. But I don't even know that an apology is necessary in this particular case.
I guess the apology wouldn't really be like, "Oh, I'm really meaningfully sorry for what I said." It would be like, sucks, like,
right.
That's shitty. like, think about a third person not in this scenario
Right.
being like, oh, that sucks to hear about yourself. But it's not like, I'm sorry I said that, right?
Maybe I'm sorry that you read those things about you.
Right.
However, had you have not picked up my phone,
You probably
we
wouldn't have.
wouldn't be here.
And you'd be fine.
And everything would be okay. But not, I'm sorry that I spoke poorly, that you're entitled to have your own private
Okay, so what if
thoughts.
it's the situation with a girlfriend and boyfriend or like partners, whatever?
Snooping through each other's phone.
Because that's
a
different.
big one. Well, there's lots of boundary violations that go on in those situations.
Okay, but like in this situation, what if boyfriend read through girlfriend's phone and girlfriend had said, oh, what a horrible lover and what a
bad in bed.
and like I had like I have other male suitors on the horizon
Right.
or something,
I probably still would say,
the same thing.
why did you pick up my phone?
Well,
Because
yes,
it's on that
but wouldn't
person.
you? But okay, and doesn't that make a difference relationally?
A little bit, but also like, I'm sorry you had to read those things, like sucks for you. However, like legit, that's my phone that you decided you were going to go through. So whatever information you're choosing to read
That's on you.
It's at your own
is kind
peril.
of on you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's part of,
But what if he were to be like, but why would you be with me if you could say all of these things?
Well, then that becomes like a whole other conversation, right? I mean, sure. Well, I like to vent to my friends. I like to talk to them. I don't necessarily mean any of those things. I like to vent and we laugh about our boyfriends together, as some people do, or girlfriends or whomever. And people do that. They bond in
But I
those
do
ways
feel like it
sometimes.
makes a difference. Like for me, if I were to say anything really horrible about my husband to somebody, which I wouldn't, right? Like if I were to talk to Michaela about my husband, it would be me confiding her about, an issue I'm having that I want help resolving. It wouldn't be trash talking
Right.
my husband. If he were to go through my phone and see that, which he wouldn't, but if he did, I'd be very upset that he went through my phone, but I'd be very sad that he
Yes.
saw what I said about him.
Yes. I mean,
Whereas like
It
in the
depends
other
what you say.
but that's what I'm saying. But I'm specifically saying if I said something bad. So,
Horrible, yeah.
So if I said something, horrible about like my brother-in-law or my sister-in-law, I wouldn't feel the same way. Or like a cousin, I wouldn't feel the same way as I would feel if it were my husband.
well, there's a like a betrayal piece here.
Right.
A deeper sense of like, oh, I betrayed this person I love so much. And he read that and that really hurts. And now I need to take a second look at maybe I shouldn't say this stuff. So again, we're back to checking our own gut. Like, ooh, maybe I don't want to do that. And I think it's okay to share that with your husband as well.
Right. And in that situation, it's sorry is kind of more of an understandable thing.
Exactly. Sorry makes sense there.
Sorry makes sense there. Okay, so we also do lightning rounds
Of Would You Rather.
And then before we end the episode, we usually end the episode of Would You Rathers, but before we end the episode, I really want to circle back to why we set boundaries and what the purpose of them are, because I want to leave our viewers with that at the end. Or do you want to go into that first?
We could talk about why we set boundaries and then go into our Would You Rather.
let's talk
Just
about
a really
why-
quick recap of why do we set boundaries?
I feel like it's really important for us to touch base on what the purpose of a boundary is, right? Because it's so easy for someone to feel like a boundary is a form of rejection, and it's not.
it's to strengthen the relationship.
At least that's how we see it, and why we want to talk to our viewers about, because it has been difficult for us to set boundaries in our personal lives and in our family lives. And, a lot of people struggle with it. I'm very close to my mom. I do think that she's struggled with boundaries before in her life. I'm able to talk to her about it more, but when it's taken as a rejection, it's hard to strengthen the relationship. It's hard to achieve what the boundary is for.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is it's about protecting your mental health. Boundaries are the ways that we protect our core values, our sense of self, who we are as human beings, what is important to us, what we value. it's also making room for ourselves in certain dynamics where you don't feel that the person is respecting you or giving you the correct space that you're needing or not needing. Really being able to be explicit about that is what I think is the core purpose of having boundaries with others.
Yeah. And like the ultimate goal of, I think that's actually really interesting because I think you're right. I think it's about protecting sense of self, protecting mental health, protecting your peace.
That's right.
But it's also something that if someone respects, it's something that can serve to foster a healthier and happier closer relationship.
It is, and it's always really a good way, like, of establishing in your friendships, your relationships with people, getting them to really, like, your boundaries are important and they know that. Like, my best friend, she knows, like, certain, like, if I could think of like an example, like certain things that might annoy me, you know, she respects that about me, you know, and doesn't judge me for it. But like in certain situations, it takes a long time to continue to reestablish your boundaries, but that's good mental health.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that's all really, really great stuff for our viewers.
Yeah. Would you rathers?
Would you rathers?
Okay, what's that?
I'm excited. We usually like to include like a dirty one, but I feel like in this specific situation, it doesn't really.
They weren't that saucy this time.
Okay. You can try.
Okay. Would you rather every time your mother-in-law visits, she pushes you out of the kitchen because she knows what her baby likes to eat, or have your mother-in-law ask about you and your husband's sex life at a family gathering in front of everyone?
I think I'd rather she pushes me out and let her cook for it.
Is that what you would? Okay, what about you? Which would you rather? Bernie, you have to participate.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't like either, but I guess I might actually go with the being in the kitchens.
Because then you get like
with
like
the
Then you
meals.
don't have to cook.
Yeah, because then you don't have to cook.
I would rather the sex life.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh my gosh, because first of all, like, what a chutzpah. You're in my home. It's what is chutzpah in my space. I would not like that every time. I would not. And then if she asked me about that in front of everybody, I'd be like, that's really weird.
Right.
That's a good point.
Oh, that's
a
a good point.
really good point.
Like, you guys,
could call her out on her shit.
react
Yeah.
Oh
to
my gosh,
this.
so then you get an opportunity to
Right?
establish a boundary with her.
Exactly. I would be like, what a bizarre thing to bring up at family dinner. Like, what's your sex life like? You know?
That's a really good one. I didn't think of that.
But like, if you pushed her back out of the kitchen, she'd be like, you bitch, I was just trying to cook for you.
Right, exactly. No, that's a really good point. I like that.
Okay, so do you guys change your would you rather?
Yeah, we changed.
I
changed over.
I convinced you?
Yeah.
You did. You convinced me.
Okay, next one. Would you rather your sister-in-law show up unannounced at your house and walk in without knocking, or when your mother-in-law is over, walk into your bedroom without knocking?
I definitely don't want her in my bedroom.
Sister-in-law?
I think
based on your last answers, I would rather my mother-in-law try walking into my bedroom because I could be like, stop walking. I would not want I just don't like people coming into my space unannounced.
It's almost like the more egregious thing is easier because it's an easier, obvious boundary.
Yeah, that's true.
Because you could be like, why are you doing that?
you could
That's
be like,
really
you're
weird.
I should be like,
bedroom.
hello, this
Exactly.
is my bedroom.
And
Why are you
honestly, I would
in
probably
here?
just always be naked so that if she did it, she would walk in on me naked and I'd be like, serves you
Hello?
right. You know?
So that boundary's established. That's like not even in question.
Right? It'll just never happen again. Right? I'm pretty good at this. Okay. I feel like
You
I'm
are
really
good at this. I think you might be winning.
Do we have one more?
We have one more. Would you rather deal with someone who gets confrontational when you address your boundaries have been crossed, or deal with someone who is nice but repeatedly does it and can't catch the drift?
Confrontational.
Yeah, I'm into the confrontation too because you can be really direct with them.
Yeah, confrontational too, because
It's just easier.
Again, it's easier. It's easier to set boundaries when the thing necessitating boundaries is more obvious.
Right. In the other situation, the person's more like passive aggressive, and then it just takes longer.
And maybe they're not, and they're just nice. The lights are off.
Right. They're just not.
And then you're just like,
they're never going to get it.
But you know what? For those people, I'm kind of like, okay, they just have no self-awareness, like whatever.
Right. It's kind of on them at that point. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming on our
You're so
pod,
welcome.
Berni.
Thanks for teaching
It was
everyone
great
what
having
time.
you. And we'll see everyone next week.
Next week.